for all the operation there. So when
It's not so popular anymore.
There's three Hirsch. There's Hirsch, there's Hershey, there's Herschel. Zusha, you didn't have time to talk to...
No, only Tim.
Hi, how are you?
let me introduce you.
She wants to talk to you so that you don't undercut her story.
One of the pioneers of Jamaica. Pillars of Jamaica. This is wife Tracy.
Hello. Hello.
Tonight's event has been. This is Joe. Keep telling top support.
You were born in Jamaica?
Yes.
And your wife as well?
Yes.
We need a picture.
People really visit big cities and not so small.
And you know that while the Jewish community in Jamaica is relatively small, running through the veins of wide subsections. You know, if you just look at
Especially Spanish.
yes, Spanish Portuguese.
Stein, Stern, all sorts of things. But you know something, her on the radio, BBC program, as a radio and Broadcasting Corporation.
Really?
They probably would have done research.
They would have done some,
They're very good.
yeah.
That's very interesting.
Isn't that interesting? I was very shocked.
Well, at the time there were not that many people living here in the 15th,
That's true,
1500.
but that would have
So-
washed out.
That must be
Especially when you do now the CNA, then the cafe now, people are, sometimes, some English people are very pure. She said, that can't be true, and she was furious.
It can't be
It
true.
can't be true.
No,
She said she's
pure.
100% pure Anglican.
Pure coffee.
But she wasn't at all, because people used to travel and, things happened.
Oh, you're okay. Feel at home.
Hello.
Nice to meet you. Danny Biran, I'm the Israeli ambassador to
Very nice to meet you.
Israel. Nice to meet you.
My wife is.
Yeah, you're gonna hear a
Such a
Yes,
nice
interesting
I'm
piece of
looking-
history. you
Looking
know?
forward to it very much. Looking forward
Yeah.
to it very, very much.
after
Where do you live now, in the States?
in London.
In London.
Yeah. And we both lived in London, but he came to London to study and wanted to go back. From Haifa, he came from Haifa. Yeah, but his whole family is there. So we went, and he worked for Bank Naomi.
One for both of you.
Today you have a family in Israel as well?
Husband family.
Your husband?
Back from his shopping and said,
Oh, really?
Mrs. Schloss, a Holocaust survivor, has graciously chosen Jamaica as one of her stops as she globe trots, spreading her gospel of love, kindness, tolerance, and diversity. As the stepsister of Anne Frank, a German Jewish icon, whose name and memoir continue to engender compassion and respect for diverse cultures, Mrs. Schloss will provide detailed insights on Anne Frank's diary. Many of us would have read that many years ago, which was published some 70 years ago following her death. Mrs. Schloss has also authored a book of which pre-signed copies are available for sale after the event, and I know some of you may have purchased before. And just to note, if you want to purchase using a credit card, unfortunately, we're unable to offer that service here, but you may go online, and I'll just read this slowly for you, jewishjamaica.com/donation. That's jewishjamaica.com/donation. We look forward to being inspired by her story of strength, determination, and survival. Let's face it, we all need to understand how to get past that which may be ugly and individually and collectively spark the well-needed change. As Emma Seppler wrote in her interesting 2014 piece entitled, "Why the Worst Experiences Can Be Our Best Opportunities for Growth, the world is made of good and bad. Saints and murderers coexist." We all know that our own island nation, Jamaica, has its share of unrest, anxiety, and other social turbulence across national boundaries, and of which we are reminded every day. Therefore, Mrs. Schloss's urgent overarching message of love is as relevant to the people of Jamaica as it is to the global village. Ladies and gentlemen, let us ready ourselves for what is expected to be an enriching experience, one that promises greater insights, if you will, into how to embrace rather than resist, how we each can become a primary agent for healing of self, mending our own immediate community and extension of our societies. We appreciate everyone here and look forward to Eva's thought-provoking discussions. I now call upon Rabbi Yaakov Raskin. Rabbi Yaakov Raskin is the founder and director of Chabad of Jamaica, headquartered in Montego Bay. In 2014, some 5 years ago, long time, Rabbi Yaakov and his wife, Mushki Raskin, moved to Montego Bay and are the first Chabad couple to move full-time to serve the local Jewish residents and numerous tourists who flock year-round to Jamaica. Right to this day, Chabad of Jamaica reaches out to thousands of Jewish visitors. Rabbi Raskin has graciously spearheaded Mrs. Schloss's visit to Jamaica. I'm told that Chabad of Jamaica is a warm, engaging, and vibrant place for all. It is the one stop for everything Jewish. The mission of Chabad of Jamaica is to spread acts of goodness and kindness to all of humanity. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Rabbi Raskin.
Master of Ceremonies, Faye Ellington, Rabbi Zusha Wilhelm, our moderator, Eva Schloss, our esteemed guest of honor, members of the government, honorary consul from Israel to Jamaica, Mr. Daniel Biaron, the ambassador, members of the diplomatic corps, members of the clergy, members of the media. Ladies and gentlemen, honored supporters and guests, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to a historic evening with Eva Schloss. At the heart of the ancient Jewish temple, there was a sacred vessel known as the Ark. The Ark was a magnificent box made from wood and gold. And inside the Ark were the stone tablets that were inscribed with the Ten Commandments. Actually, there were two sets of tablets in the Ark. The first set of tablets were the tablets that Moses shattered. The second set of tablets were whole and complete. The broken tablets and the whole tablets both were housed in the same Ark. Our great sages asked this question, and were puzzled by this. Why preserve and internalize broken stone? Why house shattered tablets in the most sacred vessel? And why did they choose to house this in the most sacred place in the Holy Temple? Here is one perspective. The two set of tablets represent two possible destinies in life. Some lives are lived whole and complete, and some lives, for a reason we can never understand, are destined to be broken. Some of us live blessed and fulfilled lives, living out long years filled with all the joys and celebration of life. And some of us endure pain and heartbreak, living lives that are cut far too short. Our faith teaches us that both experiences are holy, both are sacred, both have a place to be commemorated and internalized. We recall not only the lives lived fully and peacefully, but also the lives that were tragically cut short. Not only the lives that are whole, but also lives that were shattered. These two are sacred. These two are holy. These two must be remembered. And I would like to take this one step further. It is only by persevering, recalling, and living with these experiences of the shattered tablets and lives that we can hope to learn the lessons of how to build a world that is whole and complete and unbroken. It is only by living with the painful past that we can create a beautiful present and future for all of us. Tonight, we gather here together as one people with one love, out of many, one people. And we are here to hear the story of two friends who, as destiny would have it, would become stepsisters. One whose life was tragically cut short at the young age of 15, and one who, thank God, is with us here tonight, Anne Frank and Eva Schloss. Both are sacred lives, and both have stories that we must hear and preserve and learn from. Tonight, you and I have the honor and privilege to hear the living testimony of Miss Eva Schloss. There's a scene in the film Judgment at Nuremberg, where the American judge is sentencing a German legal personnel for sending an innocent doctor to death. This was in Berlin, 1935. The German pleads with the judge that it was just one life that he took. Had I known it would come to this, that it would lead to millions, I would never have done it. The judge responds, it came to that when you sent one innocent man to death. In other words, if you can take even one life, if you are capable of being indifferent and unmoved and inhumane to even one single human being, then you are capable of doing so to 6 million. The way to appreciate the value of all humanity is through realizing the infinite value of each and every individual. Each and every human life is precious. Each and every human life contains infinite value. Each and every human being is created in the divine image. It's when we forget the value of an individual, it's when we cease to dignify and respect the other, that all of humanity and the entire world is endangered. And so, may I ask you to please rise for a short prayer in Hebrew, followed by a prayer in English. Hallelujah, Adonai, kol goyim, shabechu kol haomim, ki gavar aleinu chazdoi, ve'emes Adonai le'olam, hallelujah. As I stand here tonight, I offer a prayer that we never forget, the broken tablets and the precious story those shattered pieces tell us, a prayer that we always look at each other with dignity and respect and see the divine image that they too possess. And may we very see soon the time about which the prophet Isaiah spoke, a time of peace and harmony amongst mankind. And I quote, "When the nations shall bear their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks, when nation shall not lift sword against nation, nor shall they learn war anymore, when the world will be filled with love and not hate, as we recognize that we are all truly brothers and sisters on this planet." And let us all say, Amen. Thank you.
Mr. Henriquez is a former leader of the Jewish community in Jamaica, senior advisor to Chabad of Jamaica, and Israel's honorary consul in Jamaica. He is our repository of all things Jewish and the Jewish history in Jamaica. It is with pleasure that I now invite Mr. Ainsley Henriquez to address us.
Eva Schloss and Rabbi Melhem. And may I say, only after that, Ambassador Danny Beran, who is here especially for this occasion, and to all other, my friends all, good evening. No protocols further. Tonight, we are about to experience the story not just of a woman who escaped the fires of hell, the likely burning of her life in the crematoria of the Nazis, which were the same crematoria which consumed her father, her stepsister Anne Frank, and millions of others, Jews and those who were not considered Aryans by this genocidal regime. She will share not just this experience, but her evolution from it. If you were to ask me why I am associated with this event, my answer will be that I consider it to be one of the most important experiences to be shared in our Jamaica. A sojourn for the Jews who survived the escape from what she experienced, and also from the majority of our people, of our Jamaican people, whose ancestors were dragged here, and even though that was generations ago, our pain of enslavement is still with us. In no uncertain terms, this Holocaust was the most inhumane genocide ever known to humanity. We in Jamaica now know much of our history of our ancestors, of the majority of our people from Africa, their experiences over the hundreds of years of capture and enslavement. It too was a genocide, as a consideration of their lives was that they were inhuman. They were not captured to be killed, but subject to forced labor resulted in the death of many. Tonight, our attention is not to be comparative. These events are the stark results of what can only be described as man's inhumanity to man, and I include women in that. Thank you. This evening's version is the story of one survivor telling of her escape and her rebirth from her horror of the Holocaust, to feel forgiveness, to offer love, and not excuse those who claim that they did not know what they do. The world today is filled with hate, with racist mores, with avarice, or if you prefer, greed, and other isms that divide people, even brothers from brother and sisters from sister. We expect that Eva Schloss will take us on her journey where today she has primarily only one emotion to share, and that is love. So let us sit back and listen to Eva. Let us learn from the words of her experience, of her concern for others, and pray that these events and like events will do not visit us again. I will give in to temptation and to say in a universal way what was said here in our country in volumes years ago. The word is love. Let us walk from this evening's repeating the phrase, the word is love. God bless you all.
Ladies and gentlemen, Anne Frank's The Diary of a Young Girl was first published in Dutch in 1947, 72 years ago. The first English translation appeared in 1952. Since then, the diary has sold more than 30 million copies and has been translated into 67 languages. For many of us, Anne Frank's diary was our first introduction to Holocaust studies. Her friend's name was Anne Frank. I ask you now to look at the screens.
Father and brother both didn't survive. We unfortunately live again in a very difficult and dangerous period. So we must make people aware of the dangers and to have the courage to speak up.
You're just going to outfit her with her microphone. Rabbi Wilhelm flew in today from New York to be a part of this significant event. Our moderator, Rabbi Wilhelm, he'll conduct an open conversation with Mrs. Schloss about her journey, her healing, her growth, and her many breakthroughs to now be able to touch lives in such a meaningful way. Rabbi, it's over to you. Could you welcome them both heartily?
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Master Ceremonies and the organizers of this event. The main speaker is Mrs. Eva Schloss. I'm just here to bring out more details, but I don't want to take some time of her invaluable speech. I read her book. I recommend anybody to get her to buy her book. I heard her lectures recorded from other places as well. Just to start off, as Master Ceremony has mentioned, I wrote several books. One of the books I wrote is about names, first names and the meaning. And the name Eva is the first woman in the Bible, Adam and Eve. And the Bible tells us about Eve, she's the mother of all life. And I would like to say to our guest speakers, our guest of ours tonight, Eva, that she is the mother of life, of courage, of coming out and having to travel the world and tell everybody about the idea, the lesson of tolerance and live the proper way. She is truly the mother of life, that we can look up to her and take a lesson from her. In 1950, a new word was introduced to the English language dictionary. You know, from time to time, there's a new word or a new interpretation added to the dictionary. And that was the new interpretation of a word called word Holocaust. If you have an older dictionary before the time of 1950, you might not even have that word in a dictionary. And if it would be there, the translation would be, Holocaust means a fire catastrophe. Some fire happened, or prior to that would mean a sacrifice, a burning sacrifice, In 1950, they introduced to the English language dictionary, Holocaust means mass murder. And the way I look at the dictionary means that the world prior to that did not know what the idea of mass murder. And now the world changed, and this is what we're about to hear from Ms. Eva Schloss. The world changed in her youth, that we introduced something forever, that is something possible, or I hope it's not possible ever again, to have that type of mass murder of genocide that happened in the past. We all, when we go to school, we learn the ABC, the alphabet. But I would like to say, Miss Eva Schloss, she learned the alphabet. Not only learned, she lived the alphabet. The A is Austria, Amsterdam. The B is Brussels and Belgium. And the C is she worked in a camp, in a labor camp called Canada. The D, she had to learn to work together with Dutch people. The E, she lives in England now. G, she dealt with the Germans and the Nazis. H, she lived in Holland, in Amsterdam. I, she's interrogated by the Kapos, by the SS. And J, she came to Jamaica. And K, in Kingston, Jamaica, where the motto of this country is, as I mentioned several times, from many, out of many, one people. And that is the lesson we have from her here today. As mentioned earlier, I am also a son of a Holocaust survivor, and something which bothered me for many times, and I'm going to ask Ms. Eva Schloss to please start with that question. My father never wanted to tell us any stories about the Holocaust. As children, we always wanted to play with his arm, to see his number tattooed on his arm. He always covered it. He wouldn't like us to play with it. When I got married, the only one who was successful to get stories out of my father was my wife Esther, who is in the audience here now, and she would ask, "Father, tell us something about the Holocaust." He would never want to talk about it until later years when Esther asked him stories. And I always wonder why. And I thought to myself, perhaps maybe he didn't want to share with us the bad world that he passed, or perhaps he didn't want to relive that kind of life. So I'm going to please ask Ms. Eva Schloss to start with that question. I know that for about 40 years you were silent. You didn't talk about your story, your youth, your history. And about 25, 30 years ago, you started on a world tour all over the United States, all over many other countries to tell us about what happened. First of all, why were you silent then? And what changed that you decided to go on a tour to tell the world about what happened and the lesson?
Yes, well, I'll answer in a minute. Sure. I just want to say I'm very, very happy to have been invited to come to Jamaica. We in England have, of course, a lot of common with this country. It used to belong to England, which was perhaps not so good or not so nice, but we still have a lot of common. You could drive on the left-hand side like we do. So, well, to go to more serious answers. Yes, I just turned 16 when I came back from Auschwitz, and I learned that my father, my brother, and many, many, many of my family members would never come back. And, I had survived because we had a very happy life in Austria, and as a young girl, I wanted to get this life as well. I wanted to have a boyfriend, I wanted to get married, I wanted to have children and grandchildren. So I never ever gave up hope in the camp. And that was really, if once you gave up hope, your body was not worth anything. Only through a strong, strong mind did you have a chance to get through.
The mother of life. The mother of life.
Yeah, exactly. But when I heard that we will never ever be a family again, and we were on our own, my mother and me in Amsterdam, completely deserted of every help of anything, and my mother was very spoiled. She had never worked before. She suddenly had to find a living. I had to go back to school. I was an adult. I thought I'm not going to sit in a class with those kids, but I had to. And you know, I became extremely depressed, and I wanted to tell people what has been going on, but the world wasn't ready. They said, we have all suffered, which was true. In Holland, especially where we came back, I just tell you this now, so it's really usually I tell it at the end. When we came back to Holland, we had been looked after the whole journey through Russia, because we were liberated in January. We only came back to Holland in June. So all this time we had nothing. So we were all helped by the authorities. But in Holland, we were just dropped, and that was it. And we couldn't understand. We thought we will be welcome, we will be looked after. And then we heard all the occupied countries had been freed already with the invasion. France, Denmark, Norway, Greece, but Holland was occupied by the Nazis till the end of the war. And the Germans took everything the Dutch produced to feed their own people. And so in Holland it was called the Hunger Winter. Tens of thousands of people were found dead in their apartment. There were no cats and dogs, they all have been eaten. And then suddenly more people come from Germany as well, who wanted help, who wanted care, who wanted to be looked after. And it just wasn't there in Holland. So, you know, so they didn't want to know. And then, not just me, but every survivor suppressed it. And then, when 20, 30 years after, they started to want to learn, we were not ready anymore. So it took us really 40, 50 years, and some people never even spoke. When I started to speak, people said, oh, I wish that my mother or my father would speak like you do. I said, well, go and ask them. You know, my children resented it, said I didn't tell them. And I said, well, if you wanted to know so badly, why didn't you ask? Oh, that we couldn't do. You know, it was a subject you were scared to mention.
Because they're scared, or the people who are survivors were occupied in making their own life. They want to forget the past to try to make their own life, and later on, 40 years later, when they established their own family life, then they were ready to tell the story.
Yeah, it is a problem that you hear now that soldiers who come back from Afghanistan or so has, well, terrible problems, but now they get counseling. One of the first questions, I guess, usually in America, did you have counseling? Well, in 1945 in Europe, that was unknown. So, you know, we had to try to work through it on our own, and that was very, very hard. I had nightmares for many, many years, and the peculiar thing is, I was very, very close with my mother, but even, you know, if we would have talked together about how we both suffered, it might have been easier, but even we couldn't speak about that. We pretended it's okay, but it wasn't.
Let's go back to the chronological time of growing up in your youth in Vienna, Austria. Give us a little bit of a picture how the life was as a youth in Vienna in the 30s.
Well, we had a very, very great big family. My mother was 18, my father 21 when they got married. They got an older brother for me, and then I was born. We had grandparents. We were very, very close. We visited them every day, and aunts and uncle. And I was a sporty child, and Austria was ideal. We went into the mountains, skiing, and in summer mountain climbing, and you know, we were really very, very happy. So I must say, there was difficulty, of course, from the First World War. And in the 30s, many people didn't have it so easy, actually. And there was actually anti-Semitism. But it was suppressed. So we mixed with non-Jewish and with everybody. You didn't ask what religion you had. But in Austria and Germany, you had to have religious education in your school, ordinary school. So the Jewish children were called out. We went to a different classroom. I think there were 6 or 7 Jewish children in my class. And we had the Old Testament, the holidays, and a little bit of Hebrew. And then we went back to the class, and so everybody knew who was a Jew. But it didn't matter at all. But in March 1938, Hitler's army just marched in. There was no plan before that, there was no, it really came completely unexpected.
Did the Jewish people see it coming?
Not really, because there was supposed to be a voting on it, but Hitler didn't wait for that. So he just came in, and the population changed from one day to the next. Suddenly, even our friends stood in the street with big swastika flags, where they got them from, God knows, and with Heil Hitler salute, and life from day one changed. My brother, who was 12 years old, came home from school, his clothes were torn, blood was streaming from his face. When my parents asked him, "What on earth has happened to you, Heinz?" He said, "My own friends did that, and the teachers just watched it happening and didn't interfere." It was really unbelievable how a whole people could have changed from one day to the next.
What did your father do there as a...
Well, my father was of course in Germany in 1938, there was already a lot of open anti-Semitism. Lots of Jewish people had lost their jobs, the shops were confiscated, and even Jews were taken to different camps. Dachau, near Munich, was the first concentration camp. It was not yet a killing camp, but many, many people perished there. Actually, my father-in-law was arrested in 1936 just because a non-Jew owed money to him. So he denounced him and he was sent to Dachau. And this is interesting.
But he was in Austria?
No, in Munich, near Munich. And so Dachau was the nearest camp. He was in 33 till 36. In 36, he was released with the condition that within 6 weeks they leave the country. Well, they were very ordinary people. They had no connection. If you were a writer or an industrialist or somebody of importance, you would be able to get out. But an ordinary person had no chance. So his mother tried, my husband's mother tried everywhere to get to all the consulates to beg for a visa, and no. Then they heard from the British consul, he had a few special visas for Palestine, and they got this. So in 1936 they went to Palestine, that's how this family was saved. So I always use this as a proof that Hitler didn't want to kill the Jews at first. Only when he realized the world doesn't care, because President Roosevelt had in 1936 a conference in Evian in France, where many, many countries were invited, and one of the main subjects was, what are we doing with those Jewish people? Do we want them or not? And nobody, few countries said a few hundreds they would take in.
Leave Austria to find another country. What is
well, my father immediately realized this is not a country where he could stay. And he left. He had business contact in Holland, so he left to Holland. But when we wanted to follow, the borders had been closed as well for us.
He went alone?
He went on his own.
With a plan to call you when he's ready?
Exactly. He said, I find somewhere to live and so on. Nobody expected that it would go so quickly, you know, the deportation.
So how long were you, your mother and your brother and yourself alone waiting for your father in Holland?
Well, it was all very secret. And you know, the parents tried to protect us, so they didn't tell us really how dangerous it was, how long we would be separated, or if at all, perhaps we would never be able to get together. You know, it was all done, well, to spare the children, you know, you would do this anyway, you know. And we were young and we didn't really realize the danger at that time. So eventually we realized we can't really stay, and we escaped to Belgium, which was possible illegally.
So your father was in Holland?
And we were in Belgium. But he came to visit, weekends he came to visit us. And in Belgium we were not welcome, we were dirty Jewish refugees. And
You write in the book that in Belgium, all of a sudden you put into a class learning a new language, and you had difficulties coming from the German language.
well, of course, you know, I mean, I was a very friendly, open, happy child. Suddenly I was put in the end of a class. The teacher, nobody took any notice of me because I couldn't speak with the children. They thought I'm deaf and dumb and whatever. You know, no understanding whatsoever. And then, you know, in Austria we had always lovely birthday parties, like in England as well. And I wanted eventually, you know, a birthday party. I made some friends, and I was going to have 6 little girls. And the day of my birthday, all those 6 girls brought a letter from the parents. They are not allowed to come to my party. I went home crying, and my mother explained, well, they obviously don't want to mix with Jewish refugees. You know, that is for a child to grow up very, very tough.
How old were you then?
11. And then the war started. Hitler went into Poland, Czechoslovakia, and the Second World War started. And my father had tried all the time to get a visa. Eventually, we got this to visit him in Holland for 6 weeks, or 3 months. And we had, of course, no furniture, nothing. So we took my father took a furnished apartment in an open square called Bervedeplein. It's still there. It still looks very similar. And there was from a Jewish woman who had fled to Switzerland. And so it was very nice. There was a piano because my brother was a wonderful pianist, a musician altogether. Already with 15, he could play Gershwin, Rhapsody in Blue from his height. So really very, very talented. And so we settled down there. But in apartments, of course, you have no yards to play for the children. So after school, they all came out in this open place. And one day, a little girl, you have heard this story, came to me and introduced herself. Her name was Anne Frank. But of course, she was not famous. She was just one of the, we were both 11 at the time, one of my playmates. I had become so experienced already, hatred and discrimination. I had become quite shy, but she had left when she was 4 years old from Frankfurt, Germany. Her father, Otto, who later became my stepfather, always told us when he saw the Nazis marching through the city, singing a very famous Nazi song, when Jewish blood drips from our knives, life is going to be good again. He said, when I heard that singing, I realized this is not the country where I want to bring up my family, and he left in 1933 to Amsterdam.
What did Anne Frank's parents do in Amsterdam?
Well, Otto got from his brother-in-law, who lived in Basel, and he left in 1929, nothing to do with the war or anything. He was a representative of Opekta, that was to make jam, to thicken the jam. And he got this for Holland. So Otto, he was really the son of a banker, had no idea how to do this. And this is actually a very, very interesting story, which I've never told. He had to have a secretary, and so he put an advert in the paper, and there came a woman who could speak Dutch, and because Otto couldn't speak Dutch, and this woman, Miep Gies, could speak German and Dutch, so he engaged her as his secretary, and she actually helped. There was one of the main person who helped hiding the family. But she was actually, why she could speak German, was because after the First World War, there was big starvation in Austria and Germany, and she was from Austria, and the Dutch, who had been not in this war, asked for children, Austrian children, to come to Holland for a year to fatten them up. And this Miep Gies came, and this is a funny thing, I still don't know. Her parents gave her up. She had good foster parents and they wanted to keep her, and obviously the parents said, all right, she can stay in Holland. But that helped Otto, of course, to be able to be in hiding, to said, yes, engage this lady. You know, so many little, when we come to the more serious story, there's so many miracles, coincidences, really, you know, which really helped to make the story.
Anne Frank, as a friend, what kind of talents did you see by her, or if any kind of playing?
Well, she was very sure of herself, and she was always opposite from me. She wanted to be the center of attention. She was full of storytelling, but she was a big chatterbox. In class, she was called Mrs. Quack Quack because she never could stop talking. And she was already very interested in boys. When I told her I had an older brother, she said, when can I come and meet him? But he was not interested in a little girl the age of his little sister, so nothing came out of that. But she was really, well, she was a storyteller, even already with 11 years old.
But could you describe the life in boarding houses? You write in the book where in Belgium and in Holland you were changing from one boarding house to another one. Tell us a little about the life, how you got to a certain boarding house and why you changed.
Well, this is a story I'd rather not tell because it's a bit unpleasant with this. But anyway, we have to get on because we have a lot more to tell. So we settled down quite happily in Amsterdam. And, but it didn't last very long because in May 1940, so after 3 months, when we really should have gone back to Belgium, one night we heard aeroplanes and saw searchlights and so on, and we put on the radio, and it said, terrible news, the Germans are trying to invade our country, trying, but we are going to fight them. Well, Holland had no idea about the might of the German army already in that time. And of course the war had changed. They had actually just landed with parachutes behind the front line, which was flooded. Because the First World War, Holland was flooded, and the Germans just bypassed it, and they thought they can do that again. But war had changed, of course, with aeroplanes. It was the first time in this war that a civilian city had been bombed, Rotterdam, with 10,000 casualties. And of course the Dutch gave up. Besides, the Dutch royal family fled first to England and then to Canada. And that was discouraging, of course, for the people. They felt abandoned. But you know, you had to make quick choices. In Belgium, who was invaded after Holland, the king stayed and tried to cooperate with the Nazis, thinking he could get a better deal for his population. After the war, he was treated as a traitor and had to abdicate. So, you know, every choice was bad, whatever you did. So we tried to still escape to England, but it was too late. But nothing happened really, you know, so we lived, and as if the occupation came, then you saw Nazis everywhere, but nothing happened. But slowly the measures came. And it was, I won't go to everything. We were not allowed on public transport, we were not allowed to go to theaters, or for us children, swimming pools, or films, or it was sort of an apartheid. We had Jewish benches where we did, like in South Africa. And then we had to leave our schools, and so it became more and more difficult. We had to wear the yellow star, and people started to disappear. And that became, especially young men, that became quite scary. But going into a Jewish school by itself, nothing wrong with that. We had good teachers. But again, the Germans wanted to kill the young people first. So they went into the school, came with trucks, said to the children, go on the truck. The parents waited for the children to come home. They never turned up. They went to the police, where the children didn't get any answer. Even to the Gestapo, the Nazi police, didn't get any answer. So children were never ever seen again. Only after the war did we hear they were sent to Mauthausen, which was a horrific Austrian death camp with stone quarries, and they were just thrown down from the cliffs. The Dutch have a big, big monument there for the first victims of the...
These deportations happened from your school as well in Amsterdam?
We left, of course, my school, and I was quite immature, and so my parents decided with some other parents that I would have private lesson with a teacher at his house. So I never went to a Jewish school. And this is actually how my parents met the Frank family, because my mother went over, they lived opposite us, to the Franks to ask if Anne would join our group of children. But they said, no, Anne can cope with that, and she went to the Jewish school. And then after 2 years, about 10,000 young people, the age of starting with 16, that was my brother and Anne's sister Margot, and many, many others, and up to about 23, 24, got a call-up notice to be deported to Germany to work in German factories. Well, many Jewish parents thought, well, and by that time, in 1942, we knew already what had happened with many, many, many German Jewish people, Austrian people, Czech people, because we had relatives. First we had letters from them, and then it stopped. And so why suddenly should the Germans invite again Jewish people? So my father called us together one evening, said, Heinz, you are not going. I found some wonderful people from the resistance. Every country had people who didn't like to be occupied, and that was called the resistance. They did all kinds of things, shot particularly bad Nazis, blew up trains, printed ration cards, but as well helped Jewish people. And he said he found 2 hiding places. We are going to go hiding, but we have to separate. And I started to cry. I didn't want to be separated. And my father explained, if we're in 2 different places, the chance that 2 of us will survive is bigger. So, survive. So I think that was the first time, with 13, that I realized it's a matter of life and death. And that was really, really scary.
So you went with your mother and Heinz
I went with my mother and Heinz went with my father.
How often did you meet?
Well, we were not supposed to go out. My father and brother both were dark, looked a bit Jewish. My mother and me were blonde. And they always used to say, oh, you look like a Dutch meisje, like a Dutch girl, had blue eyes and blonde hair. And so we had actually false ID cards. But false, you know, if you would have looked, there was a stamp of the Nazis, they would have found it. And as I say, I was not a reader at that time, so what do? I missed my family, I missed my friends, I missed even going to school. And so my mother tried to teach me, but I was a bad pupil, so that didn't work. She lost her temper, I started to cry. So it was really, really hard. So my parents decided, so about once every month, every 6 weeks, we would take a chance to visit them. My father and brother never went out, only if they had to change hiding place. And that happened, we were in 7 different places in the 2 years we were hiding, because the Nazis knew that many, many people hadn't come to the call-up notice, and they really wanted to catch every young person. So they made house searches, and always at night. So they knocked on the door, people had to open, had to search their homes. So in every hiding place where we were, we had a hiding place within the hiding place, and built a false partition, made the room smaller, sometimes even under a floorboard.
I was in Anne Frank's home in Amsterdam, and there's like a wall, fake wall with a bookcase,
which
And
moves
the
away.
roof, and then the stairs to go upstairs.
Yeah, behind.
So this was all the hiding places were the same similar situation. They built walls to
hide. Of course, in their case, it was different. They didn't stay with a strange family, but they were helped by the workers, one of them made geese, and they stayed upstairs, part of the office building, and there were 8 people. So there was always something going on. You know, it was different for Anne, for me. With me, it was more boredom and fright. With Anne, she adored her father, and so it was actually for her partly a very nice time because she was together with him. You know, normally the father goes out to work, children are at school, but she had really her father all for herself.
Why did the people take Jewish families in hiding? What was their motive?
Well, people, you know, the Dutch people said, you belong to us, you know, and there was a big Jewish population already from Spain. They're taken in 1500, lots of Sephardic Jews, and then later Huguenots from France. They've taken in always refugees. They were always very open to a seafaring country, you know, very friendly, very good people. But having said that, every country had as well a big Nazi party, and in Holland as well. And actually, through Anne Frank's stories, the Dutch have a very good name. Well, I say, a lot of them were very good, but nevertheless, in Holland, the biggest amount of Jews were actually deported in proportion, because there were a lot of Nazis who betrayed Jewish people. You got about 5 guilders per head of Jew, which to betray the Frank family, 8 people, 40 guilders was quite a bit of money at that time. They never ever found out who betrayed the Frank family. Till now it's not known. But you know, everything about Anne Frank is interesting. And I met not long ago an FBI agent, a retired FBI agent, and he had an interview with him, and he has a job to try to find out who betrayed the family.
In your book, you write about a nurse that was a double agent.
Well, in our case, unfortunately, my father and brother had to change hiding place, and it was already in 1944, after 2 years being in hiding, was already difficult. Many people had been arrested, many didn't want to do it anymore, and so it was difficult, and a Dutch nurse came forward, says she knows a safe house. As it turned out, she was a double agent. She really was a Nazi, but pretended to work for the resistance. So that is how.
And your father said that she was the one who paddled on him, or you don't know? Who was the one who told where your hiding places are?
Well, they had just moved to Amsterdam. They were in the country before, to Amsterdam, and it was very near where we were. So on the Sunday, when they moved there, we went to visit. And they followed us, and so they knew where we were. And on my 50th birthday, in the morning, there was a knock on the door, and the people opened the door because the morning was always safe, and the Nazis stormed in, and they went straight for us because they knew my mother and me, and took us away. Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about the interrogation you had with your father.
Well, I didn't know that my father and brother had been arrested. I only know my mother and me went to the headquarters, and as I was a young person, they thought they can get information out of me. So they put me in a little interrogation room with a big picture of Hitler behind me, and they started to bombard me with questions. Where did you get your food coupons? Who helped you find hiding places? Lots of questions. And I must admit, I was completely in shock, because I knew what probably is our end now. We heard that, you know, we knew about Auschwitz. The BBC said broadcast out to all the occupied countries. It started at 9 o'clock, the Dutch one, and of course the people where we were staying always wanted to listen to the news. and it started with da 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 da. That is the BBC from London, and we were glued to the radio very softly so that nobody would hear it. And they told always about the progress of the war. In 44 already that an invasion is planned, and as well Africa have been defeated already, the Nazis, the Russians were defeating the Germans. So we had great hope, but we were betrayed. So, and as well, they always told about the 300 death camps in Germany and Poland. And Auschwitz was always mentioned as the biggest, where Jewish people were systematically guessed.
So when they
That was well known by the whole world. But, you know, people said, how can such a thing happen? You know, it's really unreal to guess living people, children, you know, and people just didn't believe. They thought it's perhaps propaganda, but it wasn't propaganda, it was a sad truth.
But in the interrogation, in the book you write that by interrogation they wanted to hear you cry, that your brother and your father next room should start giving information, or vice versa, they would beat them.
Well, they warned me that if I don't speak, they would kill my brother. Then I only realized that he was caught as well. And you know, I had no idea. But you know, I was so in shock, I lost my speech. So eventually they let me go, and then they threw me in a room where my father was, my brother and my mother by then, and my father explained what has happened with his nurse.
Now, after the interrogation, they deported you, the whole family together?
Yeah.
Where
So first we went to a holding camp, but Friday, transport was always going on Friday from Westerbork. It's north of Holland. And we were already put on the list. So to get a little story, you know, this camp was run by Jewish people with the supervision of the Nazis. The only thing what the Nazis did was they gave the Jewish boss, director they called him, a list of names who are going to go on transport. So can you imagine, this man has to decide who he was going to put on this list, probably condemn them to death.
So he had a quota, he was given a quota, how many
2,000 people, we need a list with 2,000 people.
Every Friday?
Yeah. And they went to different camps. So, of course, we had no idea what was happening. But this was, and you probably do know, the transportation was not with ordinary trains. I call it a goods train or a cattle wagon, just metal, like a container really. Metal door, just a little slit with a barbed wire across for air. 2 buckets were put in, one with clean water, the other one used for toilet, for 80 people, which was of course not enough. Once a day, the doors were slit open, those buckets were exchanged, and big chunks of bread was thrown in, like you would feed wild animals.
How long were you on the train?
3-4 days.
Wow.
We really lost count of days. But as I say, it was the last time that we were together as a family. And my father, with tears in his eyes, apologized to us that from now on he can't look after us anymore. He said he got us out of Vienna, he kept us safe in Holland for 2 years, but from now on you'll be on your own. That was for him really, really hard, that as family man, he had no power to protect his family. And my brother, I must just tell you, I told you he was a wonderful musician, but of course in hiding he had to be completely quiet, no more music for him. So he decided he would try something else, and he started to paint. And he told me in the cattle truck, that was sort of my last conversation I had with him, that before they escaped from this woman, I've missed this out, but I can't tell everything, why they had to find a new hiding place was because where they were staying, the woman blackmailed them for more money. So before they escaped from this hiding place, they hid the paintings under the floorboard with a note on it. This belongs to Heinz Geiringer, and after the war he's going to pick it up again. And he said, you'll be amazed what I have achieved. And as well, 200 poems he hid as well there.
Did you get them after the war?
Yeah.
His paintings and his poems?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
So,
and
so
so
your brother was an artist and he wrote poems. What are your talents?
I was very handy with my hands. And I did fretwork with woodwork and things like that. But I was definitely not an intellectual. As I say, I didn't like learning, didn't like reading or anything like that. But all this has changed. I have two lives. One before the war, where I was just a sporty child, and afterwards I became a big bookworm, and I did very well in school.
So we're up to now when you were deported as a family, you were in the cattle cars.
So eventually it stopped. It was a wonderful, beautiful May day, and it was hot, and the doors were slit open, and we saw we were in Auschwitz. And that was like a death sentence, we felt. We realized, well, our last hour on earth had happened. But it wasn't quite true. So the next thing, we had to jump down. The next thing was men and women to different camps, different sites. If you have ever visited or if you ever go there, anybody have been to those camps? Auschwitz? Few people. There was Auschwitz, was a men's camp, Birkenau was a women's camp, then there was Monoway, which was a factory camp, and then some other smaller camps. But Auschwitz was the big thing. Birkenau was built later, very low little wooden barracks, not meant to last forever. So can you imagine to say goodbye to your daughter or to your son or to your husband, assuming you will never ever see each other again? So you can imagine people clinged to each other, cried, and was very emotional. It was really very, very terrible. My father took me by the hands, I'll never forget that, and looked at me very, very sad, tears in his eyes, and he said, God will protect you. So,
that was the day that you arrived in the camp?
Day, yeah, just half an hour after arrival, right away, and the men walked away to Auschwitz, because this time the train had gone to Birkenau.
In the book, you also write about that you were standing in front of Dr. Mengele. Was that the first day when you came?
First day.
Tell us your experience standing in front of
so it all went so quick, you know. So there were perhaps 400 or 500 women.
You knew who the doctor was when you stood in front of him, Dr. Mengele?
Well, we heard, no, I'd never heard of Dr. Mengele, but we heard the other inmates who were standing there to help with all this. Mengele is coming. Selection. We had no imagination what this all meant. So the next thing, rows of five, everything was rows of five this way. And then this Mengele came, 40 years old or something, very clean, polished boots. He had a little, like a conductor. And he looked at the rows of five, first rows of five, fraction of a second, and decided this side or this side.
But you were dressed
first miracle. In this holding camp, you know, we just had the clothes we were arrested in for a week.
The civil clothes, not the...
Yeah, the ordinary clothes. Before we were...
Right.
In Westerbork, in this holding camp, a good soul gave my mother a hat and coat. And when we stood there in this row of five, my mother gave me this hat and coat. The hat was a bit like a rabbi's hat with a big rim. Yeah, like a big rim. And so when Mengele looked at me, a fraction of a second, he didn't see how young I was. So this big hat had saved my life. But my mother, till her dying days, and she was well over 90, always said to me, do you remember, she had a little bit dementia, you remember when I saved your life, when I gave you my hat and coat? And that was true. because without the hat, I would certainly not have made it. Many, many girls, even older than me, were taken to the wrong side. So all children, there were no children, were walked somewhere, and then we went into the camp. The next thing, in the big barrack, next thing, undressed completely naked. So all the hat and clothes and all the clothes were just thrown on the floor, was all collected. Everything which was taken away from the Jewish people and other people. There were as well gypsies, Jehovah's Witnesses, gay people, lots of Polish people in the camp. So, and we all had a triangle showing what group you were. And the Jewish people were treated the worst. But so naked we stood there, then we were all tattooed, then all our hair was shaved. And while this was going on, and this is what I object the most, the cruelty. Those were young Nazi boys, you know. They, with much pleasure, they told the group of us, the people you have been separated from, were told they were going to go to a shower. And then they laughed. But it wasn't a shower. But because the pipes, there was poisonous gas. And within 15 minutes, all your family, all your children are already dead by now. When you go out, you can see already burning, you can smell already.
How far was the crematorium from your barrack?
It was, you know, it was huge, this Birkenau. It was A, B, C, D cab, and the crematorium was sort of walking distance, not very far.
But you saw the
but
smoke?
the chimneys, you saw and smelled it every day, all the time. So you can imagine how a mother or a sister or a daughter felt when her...
So how long were you in the camp?
9 months. But many, many terrible things happened. One day, I mean, you know, we worked from morning till evening. There was no toilet break. Food we'd only get in the morning a little bit of liquid, and in the evening a chunk of bread. Well, how long can you survive on that? Terrible illnesses, cholera, dysentery, typhus, and there was a hospital, Dr. Mengele, but he didn't treat you. You went in the hospital, you never came out alive. He made experiments on women, operating without anesthetic, taking out organs to see how long people could live with it. Really an evil, evil man. And he got away. This
he
is
was
really...
between the men's department, the women's?
The men were in Auschwitz, we were in Birkenau.
He did the selection for both, correct?
I don't know. I don't think so. I don't know. I never found out.
You're writing
Probably
about that your labor camp was called Canada.
The one where I worked, and this is again a bit of a tragedy. At that time, that was in June, the Jews in Hungary were actually not taken till June 1944, very, very late. And every day those transport came, and of course, like every belonging, everything, but every transport brought was taken away. And so they needed more people to work in this place, which was nicknamed Canada, because the work wasn't that bad, and you found all kinds of things. So, and I was taken to this work to Canada.
What was the work?
But to sort out those belongings. And, but I was, you know, when we had our roll call, and the Nazis came to pick people for this Canada, and it picked me. I was a young girl, and I was petrified that I will be separated from my mother, and I will never see her anymore. So, and I could speak German, of course. So I said to this Nazi, "Kann meine Mutter auch kommen? Can my mother come too?" And his mouth fell open. How dare an inmate speak to him? You know, you don't speak to a Nazi. But he was so much in shock, and he looked at my mother and he said, "Yeah." So this was again, you know, extremely lucky. And that helped. 3 weeks I worked with my mother in this Canada, and that certainly helped me survive a bit longer because you found food and it wasn't really heavy work. But then when the Hungarians didn't come anymore, we were demoted and I did some hard work and terrible things. And then just one more little story I tell you. And perhaps it was October. Of course, every day was the same. There was never a Saturday or a Sunday. Every day was just the same, winter, summer. There was washing was, forget about washing, and we were full of lice, but once a week we were deloused, we had a shower. And so coming out of the shower naked, there stood Mengele, and a selection was taking place.
What, every week?
No selection was, no, not every week, and not everybody. You know, there were thousands and thousands of people, but our group, the Dutch group, were having a selection. And so I passed, you had to parade naked in front of this Mengele, and my mother followed me, and he let her turn around again. Like every mother would do, she had given me very often a little bit of her very, very little food ration. And she was a tall lady, and she had really, she was very thin at that time, didn't look very well. So he selected her with 40 other women to the wrong side. And those naked women marched out, and I tried to still say goodbye to her, but I was beaten with a stick by one of the Nazis and separated. And then our group was taken in the night to another part of the camp, and I assumed my mother had been killed.
But there was always only men soldiers from Nazis? There was no women soldiers?
There were women, there were Nazi women as well. The one who beat me, for instance, with Mengele there, was a woman, a couple. Yeah. And they were even worse than the men. The Nazis really didn't really do much. They just gave orders. But women were really the vicious ones. You know, for instance, one thing, in the barrack, they had, so supervisors could cook in a corner, and we were really starving. And they cooked, for instance, potatoes. And if they had in a good mood, they called you out and said, come with your mug, and they gave us a potato water. And this was, you know, the best thing you could ever have. And I said to my mother, why on earth did we throw this away? That is so wonderful. But, you know, they were so nasty. They called you, they give you the water, so you held up your mug, and then they threw it on the ground. You know, this was, you know, you couldn't sleep because you were so upset that you didn't get this bit of potato water. But, you know, they're just heartless. They could have given you a bit of a potato. No, never.
So your mother was separated from you?
Yeah.
And where was she taken?
To be a guest.
And how did you...
Well, and many, many months passed, and obviously the Russians were approaching, and but we didn't know, and the Germans started to evacuate the camps. It took every day the emptied barracks, and those were marched into Germany and Austria. After the war, those were called the death marches, because most people perished. How can you, underfed, by that time it was winter, the snow was that high, how can you survive? Sometimes they just died by the road, sometimes they were shot. But of course we didn't know anything of that. We just realized, and many of the Nazis disappeared as well. So there was not so much supervision. Some of the gates, A, B, C, D, was left open. You could go from one, sometimes there was no work because there was no supervision. And so some Dutch people from another part of the camp came where I was, and they told me they'd seen my mother. Well, I didn't believe that. I thought they just wanted to cheer me up. But they said, yes, she's there and there, try to get there. And eventually I was able to get there. And it was all already because the Nazis were already really not really looking after the camp anymore. And so I went there, and indeed she was there. But that's a very complicated story. But I just tell you one thing. When she was marched, she told us, because in the book, when I wrote Eva's story in 1988, my mother was still alive, and she wrote actually 3 chapters herself in the book. Yeah, and one of them, she writes what has happened to her. And one of the things she writes, when she was marching to the gas chamber, she prayed to God that, she was 40 years old, she prayed to God that she was ready to die, but he should save her children. And then she was saved through a really, really, really miracle, amazing. And so we were reunited again. She was very, very weak, and the camp became very small. Most of the Nazis were gone, and one morning we woke up, and it was completely silent, no dog barking, no shouting, and we went outside, and it was all empty, and there were perhaps 500 women left in different barracks, but most of the people were still very, very ill and weak. And so I was still one of the one who walked around and looked, found some bits of food which I brought into the barracks where the people couldn't get out anymore, too weak. Many people died still. I was again one of the stronger one who had to help. We couldn't bury people because we had, the snow was, we had no tool, so we just had to heap up the bodies on top of each other. That is, I think, my worst image, which I had nightmares about. The person I spoke one day still, and the next day I had to bury them.
So your
Well,
mother was
not bury them, just drop them there.
your mother was in the same camp as you, but a different barrack.
Different, well, in a different part. There was A, B, C, D. I had been in B, and she was perhaps in D camp.
Once you found her, did you unite with her?
Yeah. We stayed together.
Yeah, the same-
We stayed together, and we were liberated together.
But tell us about the day of liberation.
Well, we were walking around every day and not knowing what's going on. Germans had gone, but some Polish people had left, as they knew, had family somewhere. But we could have gone, but we were much too weak and it was too cold. And so we always looked around. And once I saw in the distance at the gate a big figure, all in furs and icicles, very, couldn't see so well. I thought it was a bear. But when I looked closer, I realized it was a Russian soldier. You know, they wear those big fur hats and fur coats, and we were in thin nothingness, And he came in.
He was on foot.
On foot. He came in, and Polish people could speak to him, and he explained that he was a scout to find out if the army have to fight when they follow, or if they can just come. So he said he can't do anything for us. He's going to go back again, but soon the army will come and they will look after us. And indeed, after a few days, the Russians came. That is 27th of January, the liberation of Auschwitz, which is in Europe. It is Holocaust Memorial Day. And it's a big celebration now for this day.
So how many days were you left alone, no Nazis, and no help from the Russians on your own?
Definitely 2 weeks, perhaps even more.
And what did you do for food? And
well, we just ate what we found, bit of rubbish and
2 weeks.
Yeah. Bit of bread we found, and but the Russians came on horses and with field kitchen, and they stopped there and cooked their food for themselves and for us, and it was very, very greasy cabbage soup. But the smell was just unbelievable, the water was running down our mouths, and they gave us big, big bowls, but I've never spent a more painful night on a bucket, because the food went straight through me. So we realized, you know, our digestive system didn't work at all. So, and then they left again to pursue the Nazis, and I decided I would go to the men's camp to try to find my father and brother. So I went there at night because I was fighting. The bullets flew over my head. It was quite dangerous. And I got to Auschwitz, and there were as well about 300-400 men left. And I looked everywhere, and I found somebody who looked familiar. And he looked very bad, but I thought I must know this man. And I looked at him, and he said, "I think I know you." He said, "Yes, I'm Otto Frank, I'm his father. Have you seen my daughters or my wife?" But we hadn't seen them. And we asked, "Have you seen my father and my brother?" He said, yes, they were here, but they left several weeks ago with the Nazis. Well, I didn't know about death marches. So I went back to my mother, fetched her, and I said, "Well, I'm sure they'll be all right." So, you know, I think the war will end soon, but it didn't end, of course, till May. And so we had great hope. And then the Russians took us away from Auschwitz, and we traveled eastward till Odessa. We traveled till May, so many, many months.
How many people were your transport with Russia?
Well, we were all those people, from the women and the men. Otto Frank was with us. And then many other camps which were liberated came, and as well some prisoners of war. So we were quite a big transport eventually in Odessa.
How do you travel now? Not in cattle cars.
Yes, in cattle car. Yes, that was the only way. But it was, the doors were open, there was a little stove put in, and they fed us, they gave us even Russian uniforms. I have no complaints whatsoever. They were very, very good to us. No rape. You did hear when they went into Berlin, they raped and shot, terrible. But we saw when we traveled through Russia, the terrible devastations the Germans had created, that burned down every town, every village, every field. It was just dead. Everything was dead, you know, amazingly. And the Russians went really, there were those who came liberate us well, young boys with hay forks, and they just went to go to revenge themselves for their whole families they had lost. Many Jewish soldiers as well. We met many who had pictures of their family, if we had seen them perhaps.
You write about a hospital in Odessa? You met a relative of yours that was in the hospital?
No, that was not in Odessa. That was Mini, but that was something else. That you have to read, that was something else. That was somebody else who saved our life. You know, I had definitely quite a lot of miracles happen to me. Otherwise I wouldn't sit here.
From Odessa, where did you go?
Well, there came a troop transport ship, New Zealand, and we went back to the West. That's again a long story, but I have still a few stories I have to tell you. Please. And I think the rabbi is getting impatient.
No.
We have to mute you, but your son-in-law is already, we're getting over our time. But I hope you don't mind. I have quite a few more stories to tell.
Please.
So we got back to Amsterdam, and I told you before, there was hunger winter, nobody took much notice, but we could go back to our apartment. That was very important, because all the other people who came back had nowhere to go. Other people had moved in, and that was it. So Otto Frank stayed again with his Miep Gies, this Austrian child, but he wasn't a child anymore. So that was very lucky for him. But we put adverts in the paper, we went to the train station to see who was coming back. All the time people came back. Eventually Otto heard that his whole family had perished. And he was 57 years old at the time, and he came to tell us this news, and he looked like a ghost, you know, and my mother said, how can this man carry on with his life? And a few days later he came again with a little parcel under his arm, and he opened it very carefully. He said, I must show you. And it was Anna's diary. And he said, can I read you something? And he read a few lines, but he always burst into tears. It took him 3 weeks to read it. He was so amazed at what she had written. And of course, you know, you've heard today it was published, became a big bestseller, and Anne is really the symbol of the 1.5 million Jewish children who were murdered. And we got eventually a letter from the Red Cross, very, again, without any feeling, just with the names for my mother. Erich Geiringer and Heinz Geiringer perished in Mauthausen several days before the American army came to liberate that camp. Well, that was the last straw. As I said before, you know, when I had this news that we would never ever be this family again, I became immensely depressed. And, you know, I was very, very close to my mother, and we both suffered immensely, but we didn't share this. You know, we pretended we managed, but we both didn't manage. And Otto was, of course, a great help for my mother. He came very often. They discussed things about the diary, and Otto helped my mother to get a job, and so, you know, they became good friends. And he was, to me, of course, I was full of hatred. I hated the whole world. And Otto, who had lost everything, he had no hatred. An amazing, and really an amazing person. And he said to me, if you hate people, the people you hate, they don't suffer, they don't know, but you suffer. And that was true. You know, I was a bitter child, couldn't make friends, couldn't relate to people, and it was really, really hard. And then when I finished school, I didn't want to study, I was restless, and I didn't like to stay in Holland. I hated everything there, so when I go back, I said, why did I dislike it? It's a lovely country and lovely people. But I felt bad then. And Otto found a place for me in London. Said, Otto and my mother decided I should become a photographer. Okay, why not? You know, any profession will do. And as I say, I was quite artistic. And Otto knew somebody in London who had a photographic studio, and he got me a job there. And I moved to London in 1951. And
issue a visa? Or
you know, we were stateless. You know, we lost all our papers. First we were Germans, Austrians, then we were Germans, and then we were stateless. But I got a paper, I could go for a year. And in this, I lived in a little boarding house, and there was a young man who had come from Israel to study economics. And we got on very well, I liked him, but it wasn't love, you know, I couldn't love yet. And we went for long walks, and then he said to me one day, Eva, I fall in love with you, will you marry me? And when I finished my study, we can start a new life and go back to Israel. And I said, no, thank you. And he was quite shocked, why not? I said, well, I have a widowed mother in Amsterdam, and I would never leave her alone. But I hadn't told him I was in a camp or anything. You know, he told me he was Israeli, he was actually a German refugee. I told him I was Dutch, and I wasn't, I was a stateless person. But we liked each other. So, and then Otto came one day, and I told him that, and he got a bit embarrassed, and he said, well, while you were away, your mother and me have fallen in love as well. And once you get married, we like to get married. So I went back to this young man and said, well, you can marry me now.
So you learn German, and then French, and then Dutch, and now English.
Yeah, that's right.
When you came to London, did you know English yet?
Well, yeah, I went to school in Holland, and at that time in Holland, you had to learn, well, Dutch, French, German, and English. Now you have to learn 2 foreign languages, but at the time you did 4 languages. And
So
but of course,
you got married in London, or you got married?
No, we got married in Amsterdam because we didn't really know anybody in London. And when my mother met my husband, she asked him not to take me to Israel. because it was so far at the time, and at the time you could still only go by boat. And she said, it's my only child, and it's, you know, and my husband thought about it. At the time when you left Israel, you were treated as a traitor because they needed, you know, he was an economist, he was a clever young man. They wanted new people like this. But anyway, he decided we would stay in England. But he worked for a Jewish bank for many, many years, so he felt his guilt was a bit easier for him. And we spent many, many holidays, and all his families in Israel. We spent a lot of time in Israel. So, yeah, this is really, and then we got 3 daughters and 5 grandchildren, and we were married for 62 years. So, you don't always have to know the person you marry very well, you know? It's really a gamble you take.
Eva, what would be the lesson or the message that you would like for us to go home with for tonight's lecture? A punchline, message, lesson that we should go home with?
Well, there are a lot of messages. First of all, you know, not all Germans were bad, but they took it the easy way out. They didn't have the courage to speak up. Because if most people would have objected, and I think at first most people didn't like what Hitler was doing, but they took the easy way out and went along. So this is one of the important messages, especially for the young people who will be able to vote later. You know, we have to take part in what is going on around us in the world. Very, very important. And then there are many, many, many religions in the world. Even in the Jewish, we have liberal and Chabad and Reform and Orthodox and Conservative, and they quarrel even. And that is really not right. You know, why should people, because they do a little bit different from another person, not accept each other? And the Muslims, look what the Muslims do to each other. They kill each other as if they're the biggest enemies, and the differences are very, very small. And Christians, I went to school in Holland. We learned about the Reformation, the Protestant and the Catholic, both Christian people. There was an 80-year war. They killed each other. They ruined their churches. They hated each other like unbelievable. And religion is the best thing in the world that we have got. Everybody believes in something. It's uplifting, and it's so personal. So please accept each other. I went to a Muslim service in London once. I was invited. It's very much like a Jewish church. The women are separate. The men do the prayer. And, you know, it's very similar. And I couldn't understand it because it was Arabic, but I can't understand the Hebrew either. So,
have you gone back to the homes that you lived in Amsterdam or in Austria to relive where you were?
My mother would never ever go back to Austria. She said, "The sewer's out, I'm not going to go back there." One of my daughters, when she was 17, wanted to see her roots, and I went back. But I don't know anybody there. I went as a tourist. I have no contact with anybody in Austria. And the other question was?
I must ask this question. Did you go back with your husband to Israel?
Oh, not to live, but we stayed. We went with the children. Every holidays we spent in Israel.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm certain we have been just connected in such a special way with this wonderful storyteller. She says that Anne Frank was a storyteller, but isn't she an amazing storyteller?
How about you, listen?
Huh? Thank you. Thank you very, very much. You've been a wonderful audience.
We're not going to let you go just yet. So if you could, we're not going to let you go just yet. Her recollection of dates. I can't even remember what happened last week. But I suppose when you experience certain things, then those things are etched in your mind indelibly, never to be wiped out.
How was your emotional feeling the first time you said a story?
It happened actually through an Anne Frank exhibition. You know, in Amsterdam, the historians who had the house, which is a museum, they said not everybody can come to Amsterdam, so they made a traveling exhibition, and that came to England in 1986. And of course I was invited there just as an audience. And the organizer said to me, there was a platform with several speakers, come and sit with us up there, which I did. I thought, all right, there's can't do any harm if I sit there. And in the end, after everybody had spoken how important it is to learn about that, he said that now Eva will want to say something to you. But I didn't want to say anything. I wanted to hide under the table. I'd never ever spoken openly to anybody. I was still quite shy. And about this was really difficult. But people looked very expectantly at me, and so eventually the floodgate came open, and I started to talk. And it was great relief for me that I could, for starting to digest it, because before I'd always nightmares. So it is always better to open up if you have a problem, any problem, you know, a little problem or a big problem, to speak out, to share it with somebody.
Because it is indeed cathartic. Yes, there's somebody at the microphone there. Just project for us, please.
Hello, Mrs.
Schloss.
Eva Schloss. Is there ever a time where you are very grateful to your family not your family, your sister, for what she sacrificed and the amazing woman you've become because of it?
So is there ever a time when she is grateful to her sister?
Stepsister, I'm sorry.
Only her influenced my life so much, you know. It was actually when Otto became the grandfather of our children, it was sometimes a problem because he talked completely always only about Anne, and he never explained to accept that.
Mrs. Schloss, there are two young people here. They look a little timid like you were when you were 11, and when that birthday party did not happen. But I'm going to give you all the strength and the power you need. First of all, we're going to hold that mic a little differently. Hold it toward you.
You have printed out on you.
Wow, what number did you have printed on you?
A5272.
85272. Wow. Thank you for that. Thank you for that.
Hello. Do you still have your suit from when you were in the concentration camp?
Yes, sure. It's part of me now, you know. And there are people who deny that the Holocaust has ever happened, and so I keep it as a proof. If ever, you know, I would meet one of those people, I would say, but do you think I did this myself?
Wow. Thank you for that.
You said at one point in your speech that the world was beginning to know about the murders and the extermination of the Jews and other non-desirables by the Nazis, people that they regarded as non-desirable. But all the reading that I did led me to believe that it was when the Russians and the Americans came into the death camps that the world first knew about it. How come you say that they knew before?
Well, the Germans certainly must have known everything what was going on, because those camps were near their cities, and every day the trains passed there, they did know. There's no doubt that the German people knew it. And President Roosevelt was even approached one day by a Polish man who had been able to get in and out of the camp in the beginning, and he knew about the gas chambers, and he told President Roosevelt about it, but they didn't care. That was the evil. The whole world didn't care what was happening to the Jewish people.
My question, Eva, is if you were to see Adolf Hitler today, what would you say to him?
If you were to see Adolf Hitler today, what would you say to him?
I would ask him why. And you know, this is something people really question, why he hated the Jewish people so much. They say he had once a Jewish girlfriend who let him down. They say that a Jewish doctor treated his mother, who he loved. She had cancer and he couldn't save her. But I think that there's no reasons to do anything like that. We still don't know. We really don't know, and we will never know.
Hopes up during the dark times.
What kept your hopes up during the dark times?
What kept your hopes up during the dark days?
Well, you know, life is beautiful, it has so much to offer. You must just take it, you know, all the things what is there. And I wanted to have this. I don't want to give it up, so I never give up hopes that I would live.
So it's hope. Hope. After we've formally closed off this session, perhaps you will see Mrs. Schloss in the gathering and ask her a question or two. But let me thank you so very much for coming to Jamaica and sharing your story. And I marvel, I say it again, at your recollection of dates. Thank you so very, very much.
For your continued support in helping us fulfill our mission here in Jamaica. Thank you. Thank you, Isratec. Thank you, the Jamaica National Group. Thank you, the Cannonball Cafes, for their tireless work in selling tickets and bringing us all here together. Thank you, Earlink. Thank you, the Pegasus Hotel. Thank you all our volunteers. Tanaka Roberts from the ICD, a selfless partner in every sense of the word, whose support and vision was instrumental in making this event a reality. Finally, thank you to my in-laws, our dear moderator, Rabbi Zusha and Esther Wilhelm, for traveling from afar to support and to be here for this historic event. Our mission at Chabad of Jamaica is to inspire every person to tap into his or her inner soul and to ignite their divine spark, to do more good deeds and acts of kindness, as Eva inspired us tonight. I hope each of you walk away inspired and empowered by Mrs. Schloss's message and feels a sense of responsibility to add a little light to the people around you and to do your part in making the world a better place. Just a few hours ago, I was invited to the King's House to receive a proclamation you received when you entered, and you could get it outside, declaring April 16, a day which became internationally Education and Cheering Day. Many years ago in the late 70s, this day started off by presidents of the United States. And in the late years, this day became known Education and Cheering Day by other leaders around the world. This is the first time in Jamaica, this is a historic moment, that the Governor General proclaimed April 16, the birthday of our dear mentor and teacher, the Lubavitcher Rebbe of blessed memory, who brought all mankind together and always spread a message of education and kindness. I would like to thank our distinguished audience for coming tonight and making tonight's event a beautiful and historic event. Thank you all for coming, and have a blessed evening. God bless you all.
Love, tolerance, hope, and forgiveness. Walk good.
told us about parts of the family, but Rabbi Bernard Hooker is my father.
Not really alive. No, it's not alive. This is a Hollywood shot, okay? Thank you.
And travel safe.
Yes, thank you.
Rabbi, be careful.
Eva, you gotta get close to the edge.
You see it? You know this? It's time for it to go.
And I drove all the way to Toronto to see very I lived here, I went to school in Canada. That's how this is your home. This is my home. So, and now you're here. So it's really amazing. Thank you for coming and sharing. We gotta go. Thank you so much. You're Juliet's son. Yeah.
Everyone right here, please.
La 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 la